And he looked at me, and there was this pause that seemed like an eternity. And he went, "Oh, I don't know why I'm doing this. All right, okay, you're signed in." And that was the moment I now realized, looking back, on which my entire life pivoted. It was the hinge of everything. And fortunately, I was as good as my word. But the reason I picked Cambridge, this is the Ponzi bit, was that I had fallen in love with G.E. Moore and E.M. Forster and Goldsworthy Lowes Dickinson and Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein and what were then considered the progenitors and the big influences behind the Bloomsbury movement, and particularly with their cult of personal relations. Forster later, in one of his essays, got into some trouble for saying, if it came to, and this was in reference to some of his friends, the Apostles, which was a group of Cambridge intellectuals, some of whom were people like Guy Burgess, who, of course, was one of the Cambridge spies, the traitors. Forster said, if it came to a choice between betraying my friend or betraying my country, I hope to God I would have the guts to betray my country. And it's that, the primacy, the high doctrine of friendship and personal relations and an absolute instinctive distrust of causes and the abstract that I thought was part of a Cambridge that went all the way back to Cranmer and Latimer and Ridley, and not that I was religious, but those who were martyred famously in Oxford. Cambridge produces martyrs and Oxford burns them. And there is a martyrs' memorial in Oxford to prove it. All the ones burnt there were Cambridge people. And there was something about Cambridge that appealed to me. It was the mixture of rigor. I think after all the terrible things I'd done, the thieving and the explosive disappointments of romantic love and physical love and all the other forms of love, agape and eros, I just thought that I needed the discipline and the restless intellectuality and the refusal to accept the world that Cambridge represented. Oxford represents the world, and always has. It's really extraordinary how, going all the way back throughout the history, that Oxford was a royalist stronghold and Cambridge was a Puritan stronghold. And there's nothing attractive about it. I'm not saying for a minute that Cambridge is more attractive. In many ways, it's less attractive. That Cromwell was a Cambridge man, and Oxford was the capital of King Charles's Stuart Cavalier, it was his citadel. And then, as I say, also previously before that, the Cranmers and others. And all the way up, Robert Hewison wrote a very good book called Monty Python, The Case Against. He wasn't presenting the case against it. He was merely recording the opposition to Python. And he writes a very good chapter about the tradition in Cambridge of long, lean, sarcastic Cambridge people, as opposed to short, dark, rather more friendly Oxford people. And you can see it in Beyond the Fringe. There's Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller, as opposed to Dudley Moore and Alan Bennett, who are lovely. How could you not love Alan Bennett? And how could you not love Cuddly Dudley? And how would you not be scared by Peter Cook and Jonathan Miller? And then in the Python era, the same thing. You've got the lovely Michael Palin and the lovely Terry Jones, and you've got the incredibly sarcastic Eric Idle, Graham Chapman, and John Cleese. And he says, the average Python meeting would be Terry Jones and Michael Palin saying, let's have some pantomime Princess Margarets. And John Cleese would go, why? And that tension, as it were, and actually you can even go further forward. You could say, well, Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson are a lot more lovable than that awful Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry, for example.
Darts.
Darts. Oh, now you've got me going.
Yeah.
Yes, a couple of Mondays ago, an ambition of mine was fulfilled. I sat next to Sid Waddell, who is the voice of darts, that Geordie commentator.
Tell us, Stephen, what he sounds like.
Well, he said, "Twaddle the clips of the darts," he said at one point, which was very exciting, and I was able to come back with Bonnie Taylor, because Phil Taylor is probably the greatest sportsman alive on the planet. You may question the use of the word sportsman next to a dance player, but he is 15 times world champion. He's broken every possible record. I don't think that any other sport in the world has a 15 times world champion. I find dance an absolutely captivating spectacle. And I think one of the things that's most captivating about it is this unspoken, or indeed sometimes quite baldly spoken fact that people think there is a massive disconnect between someone like me enjoying the gladiatorial arena of this extraordinary game, which is performed by rather tattooed working class people. And they therefore think either I'm being like some of those Regency bucks who used to beat up the watch and go, rah, rah, you know, how funny, let's watch some working class people beating each other to death. Or that I'm patronizing, or that I'm trying to be cool. But it's nothing to do with that. There is this unwritten British embarrassment about the fact that dance is it's a pub game, and it's a working class game, and it is a very male game, it has to be said. But and it's obviously not attractive to see large, overweight, sweaty men with tattoos, except for the fact that they are so good at their sport, and the scoring of dance is so exciting that you get fantastic games. And I was able, as I said at the time on live television, so I had to be careful, I'm like a pig in Chardonnay. And it was, that's how I felt. I know it's odd, but there you are. Martin Amis, after all, do you remember London Fields, one of his very best novels, if not his best, I think. It's a really marvellous book. He writes about dance really well.
Eros.
Ian?
Eros.
Oh, Eros. Yeah. Oh, saw backwards by no accident. No, hang on. It's also an anagram of rose.
Too late.
Too late, you're right. Yes. When you're a child and you watch films on television, you tend to wonder why it is that the action, the comedy, the adventure stops every now and again for this bewildering, baffling nonsense that is eros, that is love. And then when you pass through childhood into adulthood, there's a part of you that sometimes questions why there is any other subject in the world. It is all there is to think about and talk about, love. It is, of course, everything within us. And the extraordinary thing about, and of course there are many shapes to it, the Greeks, I alluded to a couple of them, agape and eros, but there's philos, and there are many others, Greek words for it. There are many nuances of love. And we know how important it is to us, and so much so that we don't even think about it, because we sort of almost couldn't carry on living because of how important it is. And our dreams often tell us this. It's fascinating how often one dreams about a moment of love, or someone one has loved or lost or unrequitedly loved, will come back 30 years later, and you think, oh my God, I'm not still, am I? I am. And I remember seeing a man of 106 being interviewed on television on his 106th birthday. He was in Norfolk, and he was the oldest man in East Anglia, which we were very proud of. And the interviewer said, is there anything that makes you unhappy about being old? Is it, do you, all your friends? He said, well, it's not my friends, but he said, I still miss my mother. And I thought, wow, of course you would. My mother, I'm happy to say, is still alive, but I'm sure I'd miss her, and I'd miss my father if he went. And there's no reason why one shouldn't. If you love someone, you love them forever. It doesn't, just because the string is cut by Atropos, or whichever it was of the ones who cut the string of one's life, it doesn't mean that your emotional concern is cut. And love is just, it's overwhelming. And I remember when I was first involved in things like Stonewall or gay rights or whatever, and I was asked to speak at a parliamentary thing for Edwina Currie, of all people, who, for all that one may much mock her, she was the one who put in a private member's bill for an equality of an age of consent. Stop. Oh, you have.
This is Stephen Fry.
Hello.
We are going to invent an alphabet, and I'm going to make some of it up, and Stephen's going to make some of it up, and we're going to need you to help us with some of the letters. But we're going to start with... We're going to start with ambition, Stephen. What is it that you would most now like to do?
Now, it's very hard to answer. I have a theory that is very unpopular in America, that the worst thing you can ever be is goal-oriented. In America, it is taken as a sacred truth that the first step towards self-fulfillment and success is to set yourself goals. And I think that that is the most disastrous thing in life you can ever do, partly because if you miss your goals, you hate yourself and you feel a failure, and if you hit your goals, you are bound to be astonished by the fact that they don't bring any level of happiness. So it's just looking in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure what I'm ambitious to be. If I said I was ambitious to be happy, that would sound very dull. There's no one I am ambitious to go to bed with. There's no one I'm ambitious to meet necessarily. I suppose it's just what I'm ambitious for is not to turn into a bitter, angry old person. I'm now 52, and if there's anything in the world that upsets me, it is it's that kind of I hate this, I hate that. That, when you see newspapers saying why this is terrible, or people saying that something is crap, and those programs like Grumpy Old Men, it's just so easy. It's a lot of, people I like, Arthur Smith and Will Self, are bright and clever people, just pretending to be angry about things and I would hope that as I got older, I got more and more accepting of everything, so that if, say, in 30 years' time there's a modern equivalent of Lady Gaga, I want to think that I will say, tunes are so much better now than they ever were. All things are better than they ever were. They may not be, but they're almost certainly not worse. But something happens to you as you age that makes you convinced that they're worse. And I hate that something. I think it's deleterious to the human spirit to believe that your island of youth was somehow privileged and blessed as better, richer, more fulfilling, more artistic, more creative, more innocent. All of that is really a result of sentimentality of the wrong kind, false memory syndrome, and a lack of historicity. Because if you look in history, people have always said that. They've always said it. And I think the best ambition anyone can ever have is to get younger as they get older, to be more accepting and to be less closed. That's what I would hope for.
B is for bored.
Oh, thank you very much.
B is for bored. What makes you bored?
Oh, bored.
You work at a higher speed than almost anybody I know. So what holds you up?
Bored. I suppose it's very interesting being in the public eye. It relates to ambition. If you'd said, what was I ambitious for when I was a teenager? I've recently had to accept that when I was between 17 and 25, if I'm honest, I was desperate to be famous. I really was. And I know now that we're all supposed to pay lip service to the idea that fame is an illusion, a snare, a terrible rainbow that people chase that will only get further away. It's not the substance of what it is you should be doing, that the modern culture of celebrity is a terrible thing. But nonetheless, when I was a teenager watching Parkinson, I wanted to jump into the television and be part of this glamorous world of extraordinary people. I fantasized about being stopped in shops and asked for an autograph. But what I did not fantasize about was a world that, and oh, how just it is that I should suffer from it, a world that I've welcomed, the digital world, now means that unlike when I first did become quite well known, everybody now has a camera. And if you want to know what bores me, it is at a signing queue for a book, for example. It used to be fun to be able to go and what's your name, where are you from, without sounding like the Prince of Wales, which is a challenge. Gosh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But to fall into a conversation is really good fun. But now that's impossible, because the moment someone arrives at the queue, they're looking at the person next to me and going, would it be all right if I had a photograph? And it's not only that they have a camera, whether it's in the form of a phone or a digital camera, it's, of course, they want to be in the picture. So they're giving it to someone else. And that person is like someone who has never seen a reptile being given a chameleon. What? So, how do I? I've turned it off, I think. It's. If I could have back the hours in which I have gone, oh, get on with it, for sake, get on with it. If I had that back, I would be very happy. So that is when I am maximally bored, if maximally can be considered an adverb.
Cambridge. What kind of transfer was that for you?
It was a very extraordinary thing for me, and what I'm about to say will sound about as poncy as you could ever be, but as this is a literary festival, maybe it's allowable. When I was 17, I got arrested by the police, which I wrote about in my first autobiography, and I went to prison. And when I emerged from a custodial sentence, as it were, a custodial period, with 2 years probation. And my parents were understandably at the end of their tether, and they'd been amazing, considering I'd run away from this and I'd been expelled from schools. And so when I arrived back home on probation, I said, I want to do some A-levels. I'd run away from so many schools. And I'd done my O-levels when I was 14, because in those days you did. If you were
most people did them at 16.
Yeah, but
you were just a lot smarter.
No, I mean, if you could.
People, I mean.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all right. And so, but then I'd seriously kind of screwed up every other opportunity. So they said, well, it's fine if you really want to, but it's up to you. They said we're no longer going to do it. So I knew that Norwich City College, which is like a further education establishment in Norwich, did a 1-year A-level course. So I went literally the day I got back from Pucklechurch, which is the name of the prison I'd been in. It sounds like a beautiful bed and breakfast somewhere in the Lake District. Welcome to Pucklechurch. But it was, in fact, it was such a hard place, it got shut down. It had riots. I used to get called up by the newspapers to comment on it, like an old boy talking about his school. Well, it never happened in my day. But anyway, so there was this queue, and it was the second day of registration for this college, and I was really at the end of the queue on the second day, and I got there, and there was this little man, and his name was Peter Butler. I'll never forget him. He had silver hair and bright blue eyes, and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do A-levels, I want to do English, French, and History of Art. He said, oh, I think there may be one place left on French, but the other two have gone. You'll have to pick something else. I said, no, those are the ones I want to do. And he said, well, I've just told you, they're oversubscribed. So I looked at him and I said, if you let me do these, I will get A grades, and I will also get a scholarship to Cambridge. You must let me do this. I say, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Miami.
Miami is not mon ami. When I did a documentary in which I visited all the states of America, naturally, when people said, gosh, you've been, I drove in a London black cab from Maine all the way down the coast and round and up and up and down and up until I ended up in Washington State. Didn't take the taxi to Alaska and Hawaii, but went separately to Alaska and Hawaii. So I did go to every state. So not unnaturally, when people have said, gosh, you've been to every state of the Union, which one did you like best? And I try and answer that I never know quite what to say. I say, I like South Kentana, a mixture of Kentucky, Montana, South Carolina, and maybe Northern California would suit me. It's very hard to pick a favorite. But then they'd say, which one did you dislike most? And I always said Florida. It has its charms. Northern Florida, this is the peculiarity of America, Northern Florida is the South. Northern Florida is like Alabama or Georgia, which border it. But Southern Florida, where Miami is and Orlando, is, to me, it's a Gehenna, it's hell. It's rude and sort of brash and just nasty and glitzy and unpleasant, and I couldn't wait to be shot at the place. I mean, it's got a lot of hot weather and beaches, but they sort of ruin them with hideous architecture. There's the South Beach, has some nice pastel deco, but even that's become pretty grim now. I just didn't like it. It just struck me as, it's full of nightclubs and pumped up people, physically sort of shiny with pumped upness. A lot of blusher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Norwich City.
On the Bold City. Yes, well, we've gone up. We were champions of League One. I come from Norfolk, and so if you're going to support a football team, you might, if you're in West Norfolk, support the Linnets from King's Lynn, who are in terrible trouble, I'm sorry to say. But it's more likely, of course, because you want to watch professional football of a reasonably high standard, you'd support the Canaries, who are Norwich City. And so, one's gone through their trials and tribulations and their sort of mediocre successes, and into the age of Delia, as we call it, and the extraordinary joy and satisfaction that has brought, both because of the commitment and sheer bloody money that she has given the club, but also publicity of a kind you could never hope to get. When one famous dark night of the soul, she decided to get up and yell at the entire Barclays stand and the cameras with her famous "Let's Be Having You," which is just one of the great moments in football history. I think it's phenomenal. Not everybody loves football. I love a lot of sport, and football I particularly like, but I'm not saying this just because I like Norwich. I think there's some real pleasure in supporting a team like Norwich rather than having the burden of Arsenal or Chelsea or Man U or Liverpool, because you so expect them to win. So even when they win, it's somehow not quite good enough. You just sort of, yeah, but it was only 2-0. Or, yeah, but, it was a double, but it wasn't a treble. It's just like every time and when they lose, it's like they've been punched, and all that money and all those players, and all those Ferraris and all these, wags and that whole world. It's just, whereas a local team, when Norwich win, it is, wow, they won. I can't believe it. You're so happy. And if they lose, you make a joke about it. It's kind of, well, obviously, and you sort of don't mind. That's the point, is that the risk-reward ratio is so fabulous, as it were. There's nothing to be unhappy about supporting Norwich, because it's always a kind of course it's terrible if they go down, and if they're in such terrible condition that they would lose their, there'd be a share crisis or something, but they're sort of reasonably prosperous for who they are, and there's just nothing but good to be got out of supporting them. But incidentally, do you know the 3 sides in Britain that are rude, that have swear words in? Right, there's Arsenal, Scunthorpe, and Manchester United. Silly joke.
And on that sweet note, Stephen, Oscar.
Oscar. Well, you can probably tell I can talk about him forever. Thing I always say about Oscar, and if you've heard this before, forgive me, because I don't quite know how else to phrase it, but if you know New York City, if you know Manhattan, and when you go down Fifth Avenue, and I literally mean down because it's one way, and it goes down to the Village, you pass the Empire State Building, which is was for many years the highest building in the world, and it's still jolly high. And of course, naturally, if you're a curious tourist, you will pass it and you will look up, but you won't really see it because it may be very tall, but there'll be a building nearer you that can be as short as anything, but it will blot it out by in the way that even a person can be taller than it if you're very close to that person. But if you get a good run of green lights, you go all the way down, it seems to rise like a Saturn V rocket, as all the closer buildings are dwarfed and they appear to be pygmies, and it comes up in its true size. And I think as 1900 gave way to the year 2000, 100 years after the death of Oscar Wilde, he did that. Every year that passed, he got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we saw what an extraordinarily great man he was. Not just, of course, a wit, and like Falstaff, a cause of wit in others. Not just, if you like, almost a messianic figure in that he was despised and rejected of men, but as Ellman says at the end of his biography, he stands before us now, so wise, so kind, and so right. It's extraordinary how right he is about everything. And throughout the 80s and 90s, as I began to get a bit well known, I'd be asked occasionally to do a debate at a university or to give a talk at a college, and sometimes you get, you go back and there'd be a party in someone's rooms and you'd drink wine and coffee and all the rest of it. And I began to notice that whereas when I was a student, what people would have on their walls would be Che Guevara, obviously, John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, Lenin, Marx. As the 80s gave way to the 90s, and since the death of Lennon and the rise of super commercialism in rock music, young people were no longer under the illusion that revolutionary politics or rock and roll would set the world free or make anybody happy. And you would start to see posters of Einstein and, above all, Oscar, because he symbolized the fact that it was the life of the mind and art and imagination that would set people free. And he, as a kind of Prince of Bohemia, to students in particular who are given for 3 years the keys to the kingdom of Bohemia and hope they will always keep them and never be seduced into a world of false morality and false closed convention, and never close their minds but keep them open. Oscar stands as a symbol of that more than any other man, I think. He stands for